skin's intact. Around dawn, as the high windows turn a luminous gray and begin to cast pale light into the receiving room, Lily shakes herself out of her reverie. She looks at Austin. He shivers with the worsening fever. His dark eyes, once perpetually alive with mischief, now look like those of an 80-year-old man. Dark circles rim the lower eyelids, and burst capillaries have turned the whites to a sickly pink. His breathing seems labored, rough and clogged with phlegm, but he manages to smile back at her. "What's wrong? What are you thinking?" "Listen to that," she whispers. "You hear that?" "What?" "I don't hear a thing." She tilts her head toward the side door leading into the cell block corridor. "Exactly." She stands and brushes herself off, then checks her pistols. "Sounds like the stragglers have drifted away, gotten bored with the empty hallways." She flicks the safety on her Ruger. "I'm going to check out the cell block, see if we can't find anything useful." Austin stands up and nearly falls over from the rush of dizziness. He swallows the nausea rising inside him. "I'll go with you." No way." She shoves the gun in her belt, checks the second pistol, shoves it down the back of her jeans. "You're in no shape to go. I'll take the others with me. You stay here and hold down the fort." He looks at her. "I'm going with you, girlfriend." She sighs. Okay, whatever. I don't have the energy to argue with you." She goes over to the glass door, pushes it open, and gazes out at the dreary light of the foyer. "Ben." "Matthew?" Out in the reception area, the others are huddled together on the floor. They sit on a blanket after a sleepless night, their eyes red and drawn with fatigue. At first they appear to be playing some kind of game, the contents of their pockets in a pile on the blanket in front of them, as though wagers are being made. But very quickly Lily realizes that they're pooling the meager resources from their pockets. Candy bars, keys, cigarettes, a flashlight, chewing gum, a couple of hunting knives, a scope, a walkie-talkie, handkerchiefs, a canteen, and a roll of electrical tape. "What's going on?" Matthew springs to his feet, reaching for his ammo belts. "What's happening with Junior?" "I'm right as rain," Austin replies sternly from behind Lily, his voice sounding as though he's about as right as a whipped dog. "Thank you for asking." "I need some of you to give me a hand with a quick search of the corridor," Lily tells them. "Matthew, you come along with the AK, just in case. And Ben, you too, bring those knives." She looks at Gloria. "The rest of you hold down the fort. Something goes awry, fire off a single warning shot. You understand?" They all nod. "Come on," she says to the others. "Let's do this quickly and quietly." The three men follow Lily over to the side door. Lily draws her .22, takes a breath, and yanks the iron stand off its temporary mooring. She carefully turns the knob, the door squeaking softly as she cracks it open a few inches. Through the gap she peers out, craning her neck to see down the 100-foot length of main corridor. The hallway sits in silent darkness, a few cells along the wall sitting open. At the far end of the corridor, so far away that they look like indistinct jumbles of clothing strewn across the floor, Lily sees the remains of the three men sent into the prison by the governor the previous afternoon. They now lie torn to shreds on the tiles, their torsos and extremities so mutilated that they're unrecognizable as men. Their drying blood coats the floor and the walls. Fortunately, as far as Lily can tell, the walkers have moved on, despite the fact that their putrid odors still cling to the air. Lily gives everybody a nod, and one by one, they slip into the corridor. They get halfway down the hallway, passing empty cell after empty cell, finding nothing but litter and discarded clothing on the floors, people obviously left in a hurry, when Austin suddenly hears a noise behind him. He wheels around and comes face to face with a figure bursting out of one of the darker, windowless cells. Austin jerks back with a start, instinctively raising his Glock at the precise same moment a huge male biter with a wild gray Rasputin beard unhinges its creaking jaws and pounces at him. Jowls hanging in bloody shreds from a recent gunshot wound, milk-pod eyes flashing with bloodlust. The dead old man tries to gobble Austin's face as the Glock's muzzle almost accidentally lodges itself inside the creature's throat. Austin starts to squeeze the trigger. "Austin, don't fire it!" Ben Buchholz hisses at him from the shadows off his right flank. "The noise! Austin! Don't!" Blinking with shock, his fever spiking with streaks of painful light across his field of vision, Austin shoves the creature's huge head against the closest wall. The impact cracks the thing's skull, but it keeps chewing furiously on the barrel in its mouth, as though trying to masticate the gun. Austin grunts and slams the skull again and again against the wall, when a flash of steel streaks across his peripheral vision, and a knife blade embeds itself in the thing's forehead with a watery crunch. Rotten blood and black fluids gush around the knife's hilt as Ben Buchholz pulls the blade free, and then he stabs it a second time, and a third, until the thing with the beard collapses to the floor in a bloody mass of blubber and escaping gases. A moment of edgy silence follows as everybody gets their bearings. They move on. Austin brings up the rear, moving slowly, the nausea twisting his insides into knots, the fever sending clammy gooseflesh down his back. They creep toward the end of the corridor. Ben and Matthew take the lead, each with a buck knife at the ready. Austin sees Lily pausing in front of an open cell about 25 feet ahead of him. She stares at something inside the cell. The two other men pause and look over her shoulder. Something's wrong. Austin can see it in Lily's body language, the way she lowers herself to one knee and picks something up off the floor. The other two men wait impatiently for her, saying nothing. Austin approaches and looks over her shoulder. He sees what has Lily so transfixed and turns to the other men. "Give us a second, guys," Austin says to them. "See if you can go secure the door at the end of the hall." The two men pad away, scanning the depths of the hallway ahead of them with knives poised and ready. Troubling, scratching noises echo. The distant, omnipresent drone of the herd vibrates in the air. The yards are still rife with the dead, the horde surrounding the cell blocks. At the moment, though, the corridor remains still and silent. Austin crouches next to Lily and puts an arm around her. A single tear drops off her chin. Her shoulders tremble as she takes in the former sleeping quarters of a child, its former inhabitant evidently abandoning it in a hurry. Across the cinder block wall over the cot, someone has hung a small banner of letters from the alphabet spelling out the name, Sophia. Lily cradles a small teddy bear in her arms as if it's a wounded bird. The stuffed animal is missing an eye, and its fur is worn down to the nubs from compulsive fondling. On a makeshift dresser of crates in one corner is an old music box. "Lily?" Austin feels a tremor of fear as Lily pulls herself away from him and crosses the cell to the dresser. She opens the lid of the music box, and a tinkling melody rattles out of the thing for a moment. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby." Lily collapses into a sitting position in front of the music box, her expression crumbling with grief. She sobs, softly, uncontrollably. Her body shudders and convulses as she lowers her head. Tears stream down her face, falling to the grubby tile floor. Austin joins her, kneeling next to her, searching for the right thing to say. No words come to him. He turns away from her, partly out of respect, and partly because he can't bear to see her weep like this. He studies the contents of the cell, patiently trying to give her the space and time to let this horrible grief work its way through her. He sees the child's things strewn across the floor, on the bed, and on a meager little shelf nailed into the rotted cinder block wall. He sees Kewpie dolls, arrowheads, leaves pressed onto construction paper, and books, dozens of them, lined along the shelf and shoved under the bed. He studies the titles: The Wizard of Oz, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Eloise, The Phantom Toll Booth, and Matilda. His gaze lingers on one of the books. His head throbs. His eyes moisten and his stomach clenches with fever chills as he stares and stares at the book's title. An idea strikes him right then. A way out of this place. Austen's destiny written on the cracked gold-leaf spine of a dog-eared Little Golden Books classic. All of it coalescing in his mind in one great paroxysm of inspiration. He looks at Lily. "I promise you, we're gonna get out of here," he says in a low, measured, confident tone. "You're gonna live a long life, have a lot of babies, be a terrific mom, and have a lot of parties with drinks with those little umbrellas in them." She manages to raise her head and look at him through wet, swollen eyes. She can barely talk. Her voice sounds drained of life. "What are you babbling about?" "I got an idea. Austen, it's a way out of this mess. Come on, let's get the guys together and I'll lay it out for you." He helps her to her feet. She looks at him, and he returns her gaze, and for the first time since the war began, the love between them returns in earnest. "Don't argue with me," he says, giving her a wan smile and ushering her out of the cell. But before heading back to the receiving room, Austen throws one last fleeting glance into that sad little child's lair, and takes one final look at the threadbare, split, well-thumbed spine of the Pied Piper from Hamelin. Chapter 19. Less than an hour later, before the sun has even cleared the tall pines to the east, Lily stands with the others in the musty intake room, waiting for Austen's signal. She can't show any emotion. She can't show her fear, her sorrow, or her anguish over letting Austen execute this insane plan. The 5 other surviving members of the Woodbury militia, by this point having taken their positions around the room, need to know this is going to work. They are coiled and ready to spring, and each of their frightened gazes rests on Lily. They need her leadership now more than ever. Matthew and Speed, the strongest of the 6, stand near the giant metal credenza blocking the exit door. Gloria, Hap, and Ben, each clutching their weapons with sweat-slick hands, stand in the center of the room, facing the exit, prepared to move on Lily's cue. Lily has a Ruger pistol in each hand, taking deep breaths on the other side of the credenza. A runner in the blocks, muscles taut with tension, as ready as she'll ever be. Nobody knows about the hushed argument that transpired only half an hour ago between Austen and Lily behind the shattered glass of the intake desk. Nobody heard Lily pleading with him not to do this. And no one else will ever know what happened when Austen finally broke down and admitted through runnels of snot and tears that he has to do this. He has no choice. Because he has always been a coward and a liar, and these attributes only worsened when the plague broke out, and this is the only way he will ever be able to redeem himself and do something good and right. He told Lily then the truest thing, the thing that will live in Lily's heart for the rest of her life, that she is the only person that he has ever loved, and he will love her for eternity. The first shot rings out on the far side of the yard, faint and muffled inside the foyer, dampened by walls of brick and mortar. Everybody in the room bristles, spine stiffening at the noise. Lily raises one of her guns at the ceiling, getting everyone's attention. "Okay," she says. "There's the first signal. He needs 2 minutes and then we head out. Get ready." Lacking a stopwatch, Lily begins counting off the seconds in her head to occupy her thoughts. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. Austin gets halfway across the exercise yard on the north edge of the grounds, firing off large-caliber attention-grabbers every few seconds in order to draw the swarm away from the cell blocks, when the herd gets too thick. Dizzy from the harsh sun pounding behind his eyes, in a weakened state from the fever, he manages to kick his way through a cluster of biters on the edge of the fences, but soon the monsters outnumber him 300 to 1. He reaches the mangled wreckage of chain link, taking a few down with headshots. Matthew equipped him with an AK, a full magazine, and a knife. But the moment he plunges into the wall of walkers milling about the tall grass, he gets pinned down. He spins and strafes a group of ragged monsters coming up behind him, sending flesh and blood into the air in an arabesque of red spray. But when he whirls back toward the meadow, one of the larger males pounces on him and knocks him down. He drops his gun and tries to scuttle back to his feet, but the male clamps down on his ankle, rotten bicuspids digging in, latching on to him with the force of grappling hooks. Austin cries out and kicks, to no avail. Through sheer force of will, he rises back to his feet. With every last shred of strength he can muster, the searing pain spreading through every tendon, every capillary, he starts moving again, the huge male still clamped onto him. He knows, deep down, that this isn't about destroying creatures. It's about drawing them away. So he drags the male as far as he can across the leprous meadow. It's slow going at first, but he covers nearly 25 yards in this manner, hemorrhaging pints of blood, the knife now in his sweat-greasy fist, the pain a living thing inside him, devouring him. He flails and strikes out at more and more attackers coming at him from every direction, screaming as loud as he can, "Come and get me, motherfuckers! You bunch of stinking rotten pussies, come and get me!" Out of the corner of his eye, he sees the leading edge of the swarm shifting like a black tide rolling back out to sea. Many of those who had been snuffling around the buildings now awkwardly turning, bumping into each other, starting to trundle back toward the meadow, drawn by the commotion of fresh meat in their midst. Austin's plan is working, at least for the moment. The trick is going to be getting them away from the vehicles. Austin's body begins to shut down, the male clawing at the place in his legs where the femoral arteries live, ragged arms tangling with his feet, throwing him off stride. He knows he only has a few more minutes left in him, a few more feet, a few more strangled breaths. "Come and get it, shitheads! Soup's on! What are you waiting for?" He can see the closest vehicle, a military transport truck, its doors still hanging open, the wind blowing through the empty cab. He manages to drag the monster off to the left of the abandoned caravan another few yards before the pain and the pressure of the creature's teeth and the clawing fingers drag him to the ground. He crawls another few feet before more rotting teeth close in, a fog bank of noxious black stench engulfing him, the hellish choir of growls contracting around him like a giant turbine, turning and turning. The pain steals his breath, makes his vision grow dim and amorphous, makes the growing number of teeth sinking into his flesh lose all meaning. He hears a whisper in his mind, which drowns the horror, numbs the pain, and turns the black ink blots of 100 cadaverous faces looming over him into a gauzy blur. The whisper carries him over, takes him across a beautiful, pristine white threshold as the feeding opens him up. "I love you, Austin. And I always, 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 always will. I will never stop loving you." It is the last thing Lily said to him this morning, and it is the last thing he hears in his mind as his arteries collapse and spill his life force into the grass, the blood seeping down into the earth. The giant credenza shrieks across the floor suddenly as the two young men shove it away from the door. Lily gives Gloria, Hap, and Ben a terse nod. They nod back at her, and Lily turns to the door, jacks the knob, and throws it open. The harsh light of a pale sun shines in her face as she steps outside. Several things register to Lily as she takes her first loping strides across the concrete deck of the exercise yard, the others following closely, their guns poised, their hot gazes everywhere at once. But she tries to focus solely on the task of getting the group to a vehicle in one piece rather than succumb to the chaotic flow of information now streaming into her brain. The first thing that occurs to her is the absence of any sign of Austin. She scans the grounds and then surveys the outer fences and sees only walkers. Where the hell is he? Did he make it to the woods? She leads the group toward the outer fence. The second thing that registers in Lily's churning mind is the dearth of walkers still wandering the grounds. Only a few stragglers still drag across the cement here and there, providing very little threat to a tightly packed group of humans racing across the exercise yard. Matthew wields the largest knife, and he runs alongside Lily, keeping an eye on the errant biters that might make note of them. They cross the sparsely populated grounds in less than a minute, and Matthew has to drive his knife into the decaying craniums of a mere handful of walkers before they get to the pasture. Which leads to the third thing that registers fully at that point in Lily's brain. The configuration of the herd has now spontaneously shifted to the north. Like a teeming mass of ants, they swarm around something dark and glistening on the ground 50 feet from the farthest vehicle. The noise of the feeding frenzy reaches her ears as she leads the group toward her truck, the massive vehicle still sitting with its cab doors open exactly as she left them the day before. And she calls out to the others as they crane their necks to see the gruesome scene along the north edge of the pasture. "Don't look." Lily's voice sounds almost robotic in her own ears, all emotion blanched out of her now by the scalding rush of adrenaline, as she comes around the driver's side of the cab. She jerks to a stop when she sees the ragged female in a soiled sundress inside the cab, wedged behind the steering wheel, her threadbare dress tangled on the stick shift. Lily quickly raises her .22 and puts the female out of her misery, sending the back of the girl's skull across the glass of the passenger door. Dark blood washes the inside of the windshield as the female sags to the cab floor. Lily kicks the body toward the door, ripping the dress free. Gloria Pine reaches in from the passenger side and yanks the body out of the cab, dumping it in the grass. The others rush around to the rear hatch and start climbing onto the truck. First Hap Abernathy, then Speed, then Matthew, and finally Ben. Lily throws a glance out the driver's side window and sees, in the cracked reflection of the shattered mirror, that Ben Buchholz has to struggle to heave his way on board. The contents of the truck, crates of ordnance and supplies, have shifted and spilled, and now the four men have to huddle dangerously close to the rear gate in order to fit into the cluttered cargo bay. The sound of a muffled knock on the rear wall signals they are all safely on board. The keys still dangle from the ignition, and Lily kicks the engine to life. Gloria takes her place on the passenger side, shutting the door behind her as quietly as possible. She gazes out her open window. On the edges of the herd, some of the stray biters have noticed them, turning languidly in their direction, starting to drag toward them. Gloria sticks the barrel of her Glock 19 out the open window, preparing to fire a few suppressing shots as Lily slams the gearbox into reverse. But Gloria freezes when she catches a glimpse of just exactly what lies on the ground in the heart of the swarm. Already torn apart and eviscerated beyond recognition, the human remains feature familiar clumps of long curly hair, shredded leather, and an ammo vest now torn to pieces. Two biters fight over a single motorcycle boot, the visible white fibula bone and part of a bloody ankle still lodged inside it. Gloria sucks in a breath. "Oh, dear Jesus God. What have we done?" "Don't look," Lily utters under her breath as she kicks the accelerator. The gears shriek and the truck lurches into reverse. The gravitational forces shove Lily and Gloria forward, nearly slamming them into the dash as the vehicle's undercarriage shudders and threatens to break into pieces. The massive tires cobble and bump over dead bodies, both walkers and humans alike, which still lie strewn across the battlefield. Lily keeps the foot feed pinned. A few errant biters get bowled over by the rear bumper, in a succession of watery, arrhythmic thuds as the truck careens. "Don't look!" She cries it out in a strangled voice, addressing herself more than Gloria or the others, as the vehicle screams backwards, skirting the edges of the swarm. The stench engulfs the rattling truck, the air black with smoke and carbon and gouts of exhaust enveloping the open windows, as the countless creatures flock like carrion crows 50 yards to the north around the pathetic human remains, which are now scattered across an entire square acre of scabrous, blood-sodden sacrificial ground. "Don't look," Lily tells herself as she slams on the brakes 30 feet from the edge of the wooded slope, smashing Gloria into the folds of the passenger seat. Lily wrestles the shift lever into second gear and guns it. The engine booms, and the rear wheels dig into the muddy turf for a moment, spinning in place, and Lily realizes for one terrible split second that she now has a fleeting opportunity to get a good view of the feeding frenzy that saved their lives transpiring right this instant through the blood-slimy windshield. "Don't look, don't look, don't look," she keeps repeating to herself in her mind as the rear wheels finally find purchase, and the truck plunges forward in a huge wake of dirt and detritus. She manages not to look for the entire span of time it takes them to circle around the slope to the access road and start to weave headlong up the side of the hill, the engine bellowing. But just as the vehicle crests the hill, Lily shoots an involuntary glance out at the hairline-fractured reflection of the side mirror. The first thing she takes in is the entirety of the prison, the grounds now completely overrun, demolished, abandoned of all life, littered with bodies, some of the towers still smoldering faintly with the aftermath of the firefight. And she registers this in a single microsecond of a synapse firing in the deepest part of her limbic brain. This is both the end and the beginning. Then, in that single horrible instant before reaching the road along the edge of the woods, she does the one thing she promised herself she would not do. Eyes drawn involuntarily to the corner of the mirror still reflecting the swarm of biters to the north, at this distance looking like a million black maggots burrowing into a cairn, she does the thing that will scar her soul forever. She looks. "Lily? Sweetie? You okay? Talk to me." Gloria Pine breaks the excruciating silence of the rumbling cab about 5 miles down the road as the cargo truck wends its way along the snaking asphalt highway. The desolate two-lane cuts a swath through the dense, biter-infested shadows of primordial woods, the blur of ancient pines on either side of them, making Gloria feel almost claustrophobic. Lily just keeps silently driving. They are closing in on Woodbury. The town lies in a valley just up ahead around a bend in the road, maybe 10 minutes away, maybe less. "Lily?" No answer. Gloria chews her lip. The relief of fleeing the prison in one piece has been short-lived for her. The thing her mother called woman's intuition revving now in her brain at the advent of Lily Call's stony, ashen, miserable silence. Her hands welded to the steering wheel, her eyes shiny and cratered out with agony. Lily hasn't said a single word since they escaped the prison. "Talk to me, honey," Gloria says. "Yell, scream, cry, curse. Something." Lily suddenly throws a glance at her, and the two women make eye contact for a single moment. Gloria is taken aback by the clarity in Lily's eyes. "We were gonna have a baby," Lily says at last in a clear, calm voice. Gloria stares at her. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry, honey. Did you?" "He saved our lives," Lily adds then, as if to put the final punctuation on something. "He surely did," Gloria says with a nod, her mind reeling for a moment. She looks at Lily. "So did you, honey. You saved us when you—" "Oh, no." Lily sees something troubling up ahead of them as they round the bend. "Oh, Jesus, no." Gloria snaps her gaze toward the windshield, and she sees what Lily sees as the air brakes kick on, hissing noisily and slowing the truck to a crawl. In the middle distance, about a quarter-mile away, above the tops of the swaying pine boughs bordering the eastern outskirts of town, an enormous cloud of black smoke billows up into the sky. Woodbury is burning. Chapter 20. The cargo truck thumps across the derelict railroad crossing outside Woodbury's southernmost outskirts. The air crackles with the noise of burning timber, and the acrid stench of scorched flesh and tar hangs thick over the streets. Lily slams on the brakes a couple 100 yards from the barricade. In the middle distance, the east wall burns, sending up a noxious, swirling cloud of smoke. Lily can see the place is under attack. From this distance, it looks like a small herd of walkers is pressed in from the south woods, and now the remaining 20 or so townspeople, most of them seniors and children, struggle to stave off the onslaught with torches and bladed weapons. For a brief moment, Lily is almost mesmerized by the sight. Some of the biters along the breaches in the barricades have caught fire and now stumble without direction or purpose, like phosphorescent schools of fish, wreathed in flame, radiant and surreal in the morning sun. Some of the sparks issuing from the creatures are touching off sections of the outbuildings, adding to the chaos. "Jesus Christ, we gotta help them!" Gloria blurts out, wrenching open her door. "Wait! Lily grabs the woman, holds her back. In her side mirror, Lily can see the others in back leaning out of her rear hatch, their eyes hot and wide with panic, some of them hopping off the gate and cocking their weapons. Lily calls out to them. "Everybody wait!" Lily climbs out of the cab. She has 2 or 3 bullets left in each Ruger, but Matthew has at least 24 rounds of armor-piercing slugs still tucked into his gear, and the magazine in Gloria's Glock 19 is nearly full. The other men have a few bullets each, but considering the fact that there appears to be no more than 50 walkers, give or take, engulfing the south side of town, they should have enough ammo to intercede. Matthew comes around the front of the cab, jacking back the charging handle on his AK. His youthful face furrows with panic, his dark eyes blazing with tension. "What's the plan?" A gust of wind rife with sparks and death stench slams into them, and they all crouch down by the front of the cab, each of them starting to breathe faster. Ben Buckholt speaks up from the other side of the cab. "I say we go in blazing. What other choice do we have?" "No, we're gonna," Lily starts to say when a voice cuts her off from the other side of the truck. "Whatever we do," Gloria Pine says, gaping at the fires and the monstrous apparitions robed in flames staggering here and there along the crumbling barricade, "we better do it quick. These people can't hold them off much longer with matchsticks and bare hands. Listen up! Lily raises her hand and turns to Hap Abernathy, who crouches behind the truck's fender. "You used to drive buses, right?" The older man nods furiously. 34 years and a gold Timex from the Decatur School District. Why?" "You're gonna drive the truck." She looks at the others, making eye contact with each tense face. "The rest of you, how are your singing voices?" Minutes later, Barbara Stern sprints around the corner of Main and Mill with a chemical fire extinguisher in her arms, when she hears the strangest sound warbling on the winds above the chorus of moaning, reanimated corpses. Her iron-gray hair pulled away from her deeply creased face, her peasant dress and denim jacket soaked with sweat and chemicals. She feels responsible for this disaster. So does David. The governor thought enough of them to leave them in charge of the town during the battle, and now this. All of which makes Barbara Stern bristle when she hears the advent of human voices singing out from the south, ululating like a tribe of Bedouin maidens, their piercing cries rising above the din of burning wood and flesh. Barbara sniffs back the panic and alters her course slightly, charging toward the railroad crossing at the end of Mill Road, the place where the largest number of biters now swarm and press in through the holes in the fortification. She sees something moving out beyond the blazing inferno, something raising a thunderhead of dust into the sky, and the closer she gets, the more she hears an engine, as distinct as a bell, grinding through its low gears. A truck. Her heart beats faster as she closes in on the chaos at the wall. Heat punches her in the face as she approaches the haze-bound corner of Mill and Folk Avenue. She sees her husband near the abandoned railway office, shouting orders to the others. Some of the older citizens are stationed at key junctures along the tracks, awkwardly flailing torches at swarming biters, fighting a losing battle. The human shouts drowned by the noise. Barbara's eyes water as she closes in on the scene. Near the office building, Barbara sees 3 other seniors spraying dwindling amounts of chemical foam on the burning facade. David has a hunting bow in his trembling hands and pulls another arrow from the pack as Barbara approaches. They found the bow in the warehouse with an old quiver filled with a couple dozen arrows, and now David shakily aims one of the last arrows at an oncoming walker. Flames envelop a huge male in greasy workman's overalls as it lumbers toward David, its flaming face still biting at the air, arms sleeved in flame but still reaching. The arrow pierces its moldering skull between the eyes, and the walker staggers backward in a miasma of sparks, opening its gaping maw of a mouth, smoke curling out of its black gorge, before collapsing to the oily pavement. "David! Look!" Barbara drops the fire extinguisher as she approaches her husband, the tank rolling across the cobblestones of the intersection. "Look! Out beyond the tracks! David, it's them!" David notices what she's babbling about just as a cornerstone collapses and half the railway office caves in on a fountain of sparks. The heat and noise and tendrils of flame spewing out like a particle bomb make every survivor jerk back with the start, some of them diving for cover, falling to the ground on their brittle, aging joints. David stumbles backward and trips over his own feet, dropping the bow and arrows. The flames catch on an oil spill and lick across the road. Voices cry out and Barbara goes to David. "Sweetie, this is no time for a nap," she taunts him breathlessly, lifting him up with a grunt. "Look, David, look! They're backing off, look!" Sure enough, David Stern manages to get his bearings back and look up. And all at once he sees what she's talking about. In the middle distance, the swarm has changed course. Many of the biters still sparking and smoking as they clumsily turn toward the engine noises and howling sounds emanating from the vacant lot beyond the tracks. A large vehicle now slowly rumbles across the lot, drawing their attention. The plumes of black exhaust are visible above the wall, and the clamor of crooning voices fills the air. Barbara and David rise to their feet and scurry across the intersection. They find a vantage point near the old wooden water tower, and gaze through a break in the flaming barricade of the military cargo truck, now prowling the hard-packed gravel on the far side of the tracks. "Oh my God," Barbara utters, putting her hand to her mouth. "It's Lily!" David gapes at the strange spectacle unfolding in the defunct train yard. The truck rattles over petrified tracks as the horde of walkers, many of them still smoldering, fuming with smoke and sparks, follow the sounds of human voices trumpeting out the rear of the vehicle. 3 men sit on the hatch with guns, yammering and whooping and hollering at the throng, and every now and then shouting out off-key choruses from old southern rock tunes. Green grass and high tides, long-haired country boy, whipping post. And the strangeness of it, the very incongruity of a bunch of good old boys hollering and crooning, mesmerizes every walker and human within hearing distance. Then the shooting starts. The muzzle flashes from the rear of the truck take down monster after monster. Some of the creatures stagger and whirl in swirls of sparks and blood spume before going down. Others collapse like bags of rocks. One by one, like clay pigeons, they get picked off by the falsetto howling noisemakers in the rear of the truck. Lily stands behind them, holding on to a side brace, overseeing the operation with her laser-focused gaze, until suddenly, without warning, the truck hits a rut. The bump knocks Speed Wilkins, the youngest of the 3, off the rear of the truck. From her vantage point behind the burning water tower, Barbara Stern inhales a startled breath. "Oh, Jesus! Jesus, Jesus, shit!" Out in the vacant lot, the man behind the wheel of the cargo truck evidently doesn't see the accident and keeps rolling slowly away from the fallen man, who is now rising to his knees just as a phalanx of biters surrounds him. Speed madly searches the ground for his gun, but the biters are pressing in on all sides, at least a dozen of them, most of them still smoking from tufts of ragged clothing that are still on fire. One of them, a wiry female with a scorched face, dead flesh burned as crisp as parchment, unhinges her creaking jaws to reveal rows of slimy, sharp teeth. Speed lets out a yelp and dives away from her, shoulder rolling into 3 more monsters. This all happens within the space of a few seconds, Barbara and David Stern watching helplessly from behind the tower. David fecklessly raises his bow, thinking he might be able to hit the 3 attackers now converging on the boy. But he is so far out of range he might as well be in the next county. Just as he stretches a metal-tipped arrow back in the sling, several things transpire with neck-snapping swiftness. Barbara sees a flash leap out of the truck, vaulting through the air before the other 2 men even get a chance to raise their guns. Lily lands 15 feet away from Speed Wilkins, just as the 3 smoldering corpses pounce on him. Wilkins rolls away, flailing wildly, kicking out at the smallest one with his work boots. Lily charges across the gap, pausing only for a split instant to scoop up Speed's Bushmaster. The rifle has maybe 2 rounds left, if that, but it's something. And she simultaneously raises the .22 in her left hand while tossing the rifle to Speed with the other. At the last possible instant before the rotting jaws of the closest biter close around Speed's forearm, Lily pinches off a series of quick blasts at the heads of the attackers, hitting 2 out of 3 dead center in their foreheads, sending black fluid skyward and causing the smoldering bodies to deflate into the dirt. Practically at the exact same moment, Speed catches the rifle, slams it up into the mouth of the 3rd creature, and squeezes off the last round in the chamber. The 3rd biter's cranium vaporizes in a mist of purple-black cerebrospinal fluid, leaving the onlookers across the lot huddling behind the water tower, utterly breathless as they watch. Barbara holds her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and hot, while David lets out a pained breath. Now they watch the team in the cargo truck spring into action, muzzles sticking out of open cab windows, men rising up on the edge of the rear gate, emptying the last of their precious ammo into the cluster of biters. Bullets riddle molding flesh and take the ragged figures apart in a gruesome ballet of death, a plie of ripping flesh over here, a jeté of blood spray over there, a grand pas de deux of 2 sparking burned figures slamming into each other and going down in a seizure of blood, as the air lights up with the Tommy gun rattle of automatic gunfire. "Good God," Barbara Stern murmurs in absolute awe, her voice barely audible even in her own ears, as she watches Lily calmly stride back toward the truck, tear a hank of her shirt tail from her waist, unscrew a cap on the truck's rear quarter panel, and stuff the cloth into the truck's fuel tank. Only about 10 biters still stand, and now start lumbering toward the truck. Lily pulls a lighter from her pocket, lights the rag, and then ambles around to the driver's side of the cab to say something to the others. The 4 men and 1 woman all turn and charge toward the barricade as Lily reaches up and starts honking the air horn, the harsh bleeding noise drawing every last biter in the vicinity toward the noise. And finally, Lily turns and runs off as the smoldering rag ignites the diesel fumes and then sparks the contents of the tanks. Lily covers about 25 yards, nearly reaching the burning wall, when the fuel reservoir explodes. The blast is preceded by a quick and silent flash of magnesium-bright light, like a photographer's strobe, making a match-head sound, and then the thing erupts. The remaining biters are liquefied in the blast, the sonic boom like Vulcan's hammer shattering the entire town, rattling windows for at least 3 blocks. The shockwave rams into Lily and lifts her off her feet, sending her careening through the gap in the burning fence. She lands only a few feet away from the point at which the sterns now gape at the spectacle from behind the water tower. A black mushroom cloud, the consistency of coal dust, curls and rises into the sky over the mangled truck. About 60% of the frame and superstructure now reduced to scorched wreckage. The silence that follows is almost as shocking as the explosion. Lily rolls onto her back and stares at the empty sky, her head spinning, her ears ringing, her mouth coppery tasting from the split lip opening back up, the small of her back wrenched in the concussion. The other members of her team come out from behind flaming debris and stand staring at her for a moment, as if knocked senseless by the final act of their counter-assault. Nobody says anything for the longest moment as the flames crackle around them. The sun is high in the sky now, the day warming up. At last, Barbara Stern steps out from behind the water tower and casually walks over to where Lily still lies, catching her breath. Barbara stares down at her and lets out a long, anguished breath, and then manages a weary smile. Lily smiles back at her, thankful to see a rational face, and the two women communicate volumes to each other without saying a word. Finally, Barbara Stern takes a deep breath, narrows her eyes at Lily, and murmurs a single word. "Show off." They can't relax, even for the briefest of moments, because the town is vulnerable. They've used up most of the ammunition, and the wall continues burning, throwing sparks, catching other structures. Plus, the pandemonium has almost certainly drawn more walkers out of the adjacent woods. Lily takes the reins and starts addressing the issue of the fire. She places her able-bodied men, Matthew, Ben, Speed, Hap, and David Stern, along the breach to guard against further walker attacks with the meager amount of ammunition they have left. Then she enlists the healthiest of the seniors and children to form a bucket brigade along the railroad tracks, using the stagnant well water from behind the courthouse. They assail the fires with surprising efficiency, considering the varying skills and physical prowess of the weaker citizens now lugging buckets of foul-smelling water and tanks of CO2 across the south edge of the town. Nobody questions Lily's authority as she gently but firmly shouts orders from the roof of a semi-trailer. People are too shell-shocked and jittery to argue with her. Besides, most of the surviving Woodbury citizens still expect the governor to return. Everything will be okay when he shows up. It might be mass chaos now, but when Philip Blake comes back, things will most certainly settle down and return to normal. By dusk that evening, Lily finally manages to secure the town. The fires have all been extinguished, the bodies removed, the barricades repaired, the wounded taken to the infirmary, the alleys cleared of any lurkers, and the leftover provisions and ammunition inventoried. Exhausted, sore, and drained, Lily makes an announcement in the town square. Everybody should take a quick break, tend to the wounded, replenish themselves, and then meet in the community room in the courthouse in an hour. They all need to have a little talk. Little does anybody know, Lily has a bombshell to drop, and she needs to do it as gently as possible. Chapter 21. The entire population of Woodbury, a town that once upon a time was known for being the largest railroad hub in west-central Georgia, and was referred to in promotional literature and water tower insignias as a peach of a place, now gathers in the damp, fusty-smelling, cluttered community room in the rear of the modest little courthouse building. The total number of souls still inhabiting the village, not including the two men currently patrolling the walls outside, Matthew and Speed, or the man presently occupied by some unknown task down in the infirmary, Bob Stuckey, amounts to a grand total of 25, 6 women, 14 men, and 5 children under the age of 12. These 25 people now take their places around the scarred parquet floor on folding chairs, each of them facing the front of the room, theater-style, waiting for the single speaker on the program that night to begin her presentation. Lily paces along the cracked, bullet-riddled front wall, where the shredded remains of the state and national flags hang by threads on dented metal standards like totems of a long-lost civilization. Since the plague broke out nearly 2 years ago, men have lived and died in this room. Unspoken threats have been made, contracts have been sealed, and regimes have changed in the most violent of fashions. Before speaking, Lily measures her words silently, her face damp with flop sweat. She has changed into clean clothes, a colorful orchid bandana now battened around her neck. Her paddock boots click on the dusty tile as she paces. She has one Ruger Mk2 and a new holster on her hip. The wind rattles the high dormers, and the squeak of metal chairs settles, the hushed, expectant whispers fading into silence. Everybody waits in the stillness for Lily to say what she has to say. She knows she has to just come out and say it, so she takes a deep breath, turns to the group, and tells them the truth. She tells them everything. Bob Stuckey trundles down the dark, deserted sidewalk with his sticky, blood-stained biohazard container under his arm, turning the corner at Main Street and Jones Mill Road, when he sees the generators on the courthouse lawn 20 yards across the square. The squat little 5-horsepower engines vibrate and puff with exhaust, working busily, making the windows of the annex glow softly with warm yellow light. The sight of the entire town gathered inside those windows gives Bob pause, and he lingers on the edge of the square for a moment, watching the reactions of his fellow citizens to Lily's news. Bob knows what happened, knows about Austin and all the others who perished, and he knows what she has most likely just dropped in the laps of these poor people. Late this afternoon, Bob spoke briefly with Lily, shared her grief, and told her that he would support her in whatever she has planned for this place. He didn't tell her about the governor's last request, however, nor did he show her the sole occupant of that second-floor apartment at the end of Main Street. Now Bob stands alone with his box full of entrails, staring through the proscenium of windows into the radiant light of the community room. He sees Lily nodding at the folks, and he sees some of the townspeople raising their hands, speaking up, asking imponderable questions, their faces furrowed with worry. But Bob also sees something right then that makes him furrow his own deeply lined brow with bemusement, maybe even a little dismay. From this distance, hiding behind a skeletal poplar tree with his gruesome chum wafting its stench all around him, he can see some of the faces displaying expressions of... what? Hope? Humanity? Bob's mother, Dolores, a former Navy nurse in the Korean War, had a word for what Bob is seeing right now, through those grimy window panes on the weathered, world-weary faces, as they patiently listen to Lily make her case for the future of their little motley hamlet. The word is grace. Even in the worst situations, Bobby, Dolores Stuckey used to tell him, in the midst of death and suffering, and even evil, people can find grace. God made us this way, Bobby, don't you see? God made us in His image. Don't you ever forget that, honey. People can find grace under the rocks of misery if they have to. Bob Stuckey watches the faces in the community room, most of them eagerly listening as Lily Call explains the road forward. From the expression on her face, the way she holds herself, the way she almost imperceptibly squares her shoulders toward her audience, despite her battered body and soul, her exhaustion and her grief, she now looks as though she's closing the deal. Nobody would ever accuse Bob Stuckey of being a trained OB-GYN, although he did treat that poor gal overseas after her miscarriage. But now he is convinced that he's watching the birth of another new soul. This one, a leader. Standing in that airless room, caught in the feverish gazes of 25 expectant, frightened, hopeful faces, Lily Call waits for the whispering to quiet down one last time before laying her proverbial cards on the table. "Let me bottom line it for you," she says finally. "Whatever you thought of Philip Blake, he kept us alive, and he kept the walkers at bay. It's that simple. But you got used to living under a dictator. We all did." She pauses for a moment, parsing her words carefully, watching them watching her. The room gets so quiet Lily can hear the ticking of the foundation and the whistling of the breeze through the bones of the 100-year-old building. "I don't want to dictate anything," she says, "but I'm willing to take responsibility for this community. We have an opportunity here. I'm not asking for power. I'm not asking for anything. All I'm saying is, we can make Woodbury a good place to live again, a safe place, a decent place. And I'm willing to be the one who, guides us there. I won't do it, though, if you don't want me to. So it's time we took a vote. No more dictatorships. Woodbury's a democracy now. So here we go. All in favor of me taking the wheel for a while, raise your hands. Half the hands in the room go up immediately. Barbara and David Stern, sitting in the front row, their hands the highest of them all, are already smiling, their sad eyes belying the struggle ahead. Some of the people in the back of the room look at each other as though searching for a signal. Lily lets out a sigh of both profound relief and exhaustion when the rest of the hands go up. Sleep comes hard that night, despite Lily's fatigue. It feels as though she hasn't slept in her own bed in years. In fact, hasn't slept in years, when in fact it's only been a couple of days. She dozes off and on and gets up a couple of times to pee, and while she's up, she discovers Austin's things scattered across the apartment. With a tenderness and sorrow that sneaks up on her, she carefully gathers all of his personal effects, his lighter, a deck of playing cards, a pocket knife, a few articles of his clothing, including a spare hoodie and a pork pie hat, and puts them in a drawer for safekeeping. She would never throw them out, but she needs to clear the deck for the challenges ahead. Then she sits down and has a good cry. When she goes back to bed, she gets an idea. Something that she and the rest of Woodbury should do first thing in the morning before they tackle any of the other myriad tasks that need to be done. She sleeps for a few hours, and when she awakens to a room full of sunlight, the rays slanting through the curtains, she feels transformed. She gets dressed and then walks down to the square. A few of the older townspeople with weaker bladders and aging prostates have already convened in the diner across from the courthouse and fired up the ancient stainless steel coffee urn by the time Lily arrives. They greet her with a conviviality reserved for world leaders. She gets the sense that everybody's secretly relieved that the governor's regime is over, and people are delighted to learn it's Lily who has stepped up. She tells them her idea, and they all agree it's a good one. Lily enlists a couple of the stronger folks to go out and spread the word, and an hour later, the entire town is gathered in the bleacher section of the Speedway. Lily takes center stage, walking out across the dusty infield, standing in the former fight ring where men and women fought to the death for the titillation of the residents. And she thanks everybody for coming, says a few words about her plans for the future, and finally asks everybody to bow their heads for a moment in remembrance of those among their number who have passed away. Then she simply lists the names of the men and women who have died over the past weeks and months in the struggle to survive. For nearly 5 minutes, the slow litany of names echoes up into the robin's egg blue sky. Scott Moon, Megan Lafferty, Josh Lee Hamilton, Cesar Martinez, Doc Stevens, Alice Warren, Bruce Cooper, Gus Strunk, Jim Stiegel, Raymond Hilliard, Gabe Harris, Rudy Warburton, Austin Ballard. On and on she recites the names in a strong, respectful, resonant voice, pausing for a moment after each of them as the wind takes them off into the echoing reaches of the stadium. She has memorized most of them, glancing down only occasionally at her crib notes scrawled on an index card nestled in her moist palm for a few last names she never knew before today. Finally she comes to the last name, and pauses for a beat before saying it without emotion. Philip Blake. The name has its own echo, ghostly, profane, as it reverberates on the breeze, She glances up at the beleaguered crowd gathered against the chain-link barrier, most of the bowed heads turning upward to look at her. Silence greets the exchange of glances. Lily lets out a long exhalation of breath and then nods. "May God have mercy on their souls," she says. A smattering of whispered responses and amens drifts across the arena. Lily invites everybody onto the field for the final phase of the ritual. Slowly, one by one, the elders and children and surviving members of the militia file through the gate and onto the dirt infield. Lily supervises the dismantling. They take down the posts and shackles that once bound walkers to the periphery of the fighting ring. They clean up the vestibules and cloisters, removing the forlorn remnants of torn clothing and spent shells and broken bats and mangled blades that litter the passageways. They clean up the congealed puddles of blood. They sweep the ramps, wipe down the walls, and toss all evidence of the fights into huge garbage bins. A few of the younger men even go down into the catacombs beneath the stadium and destroy the walkers still enclosed in their hellish purgatory. And Lily begins to feel their housekeeping project is a cleansing of a deeper sort. The Roman circus officially closes today. No more gladiators. No more fights other than the collective one for survival. While they work, Lily notices something else that surprises her. Very subtly at first, but gathering momentum as the infield transforms, moods begin to lighten. People start talking to each other in positive tones, cracking jokes, reminiscing about the old days and hinting at better times to come. Barbara Stern suggests that they turn the grounds of the infield into a vegetable garden. The feed store still has viable seeds in it. And Lily thinks that's a damn fine idea. And for one brief stretch of time, in the warming sun of a Georgia spring morning, however fleeting it might be, people almost seem happy. Almost. By sunset that evening, things have settled down in the new Woodbury. The barricade has been reinforced on the southeast and north corners of town, a new patrol schedule established, the surrounding woodlands remaining relatively quiet, and the town's supply of fuel, drinking water, and dried goods is accounted for and distributed evenly among the residents. No more bartering, no more politics, no more questions asked. They have enough provisions and sources of energy to keep them going for months. And Lily sets up a town meeting room in the courthouse, where she begins the process of establishing a sort of steering committee among the elders and heads of families to vote on critical matters. As the dusk presses in and the air cools, Lily finally decides to head back home. She's flagging from the pain that lingers in her lower back and the intermittent cramps that still torment her, but she's as clear-headed and grounded as she's ever been. Exhausted but oddly tranquil, she walks along the deserted sidewalk toward her apartment building, thinking about Austin, thinking about Josh, and thinking about her father. When she sees a familiar figure trundling along on the opposite side of the street, with a dark gunny sack dripping black droplets on the boardwalk. Bob? She crosses the street and approaches him warily, gazing at the blood-sodden sack. What's going on? What are you doing? He pauses in the shadows, a distant sodium vapor light barely illuminating his weathered features. Nothing much. Taking care of business. He looks strangely nervous and embarrassed. Since he managed to stop drinking, his grooming has improved, his greasy hair now pomaded neatly back away from his deeply creased forehead, accentuating the crow's feet around his droopy eyes. I don't mean to be nosy, Bob. She nods at the sack. But this is the second time I've seen you hauling something disgusting across town. It's none of my business, but is that by any chance? It ain't human, Lily, he blurts. Got it down by the switchyard. It's just meat. Meat? Pieces of a rabbit I found in one of my traps. Just a carcass. Lily looks at him.
Bob, I promised him, Lily.
All the pretense goes out of him then, his shoulders slumping with despair, maybe even a little shame.
This thing, it's still in there. Poor wretched creature. Was once his daughter, and I promised him. I had to keep that promise. Jesus Christ, you're not talking about... You can make the argument that he saved my life,
Bob says, looking down at the ground. The sack drips. Bob sniffs miserably. Lily thinks about it for a moment, and then says very softly yet very evenly,
"Show me."
Chapter 22. Bob turns the key and pushes the door open, and Lily follows him inside the apartment, crossing the threshold of the governor's inner sanctum. She pauses in the foul-smelling foyer. Bob still clutches the sack of meat in his gnarled hand as he scuttles around the corner, vanishing into the living room. But Lily lingers in that cramped vestibule, taking in the sad remnants of the governor's private life. Since arriving in Woodbury, Lily Call has been in the governor's lair only a couple of times, each visit brief and accompanied by a flesh-crawling uneasiness. She remembers hearing those inexplicable noises coming from other rooms, the thick breathing, the faint metallic jangling sounds, and that weird percolating drone of bubbles, as though a meth lab were chugging away in the kitchen. But right now, standing with her arms crossed defensively against her chest, hearing those same noises, she feels very little of the repulsion or aversion she'd experienced earlier. The heart-rending sadness of the place calls out to her and weighs down on her. The scarred hardwood floor, the faded wallpaper, the windows masked with black muslin and threadbare blankets, the single bare light bulb hanging from the cracked plaster ceiling. The odors of mold and disinfectant thicken the stagnant air. All of it squeezes Lily's midsection with tremendous sorrow. She takes a girding breath and tries to push the sadness out of her mind. Bob calls out to her from the living room.
"Lily, come on in here. I'd like you to meet somebody."
His voice beckons, wavering slightly as he tries to keep things light and easy. Lily takes another breath, a strange thought passing through her mind.
The man who lived here lost everything. And that drove him over the edge, and he ended up here. A castaway in this tawdry, lonely limbo of masked windows and bare light bulbs and no life.
Lily walks into the living room, and the tiny figure shackled to the opposite wall stops Lily cold in her tracks. The sight of Penny Blake sends an icy trickle of terror, most of it involuntary, down through Lily's bowels. The flesh on the back of her neck prickles. But accompanying these innate responses come stronger and stronger waves of despair, sadness, and even empathy. Something about the way the accoutrements of childhood still cling to this creature sends Lily's mind reeling. The shriveled, blackened face crowned with ratty pigtails and filthy ribbons tied in bows. The little pinafore dress so inundated with drool and bile and gore that its original cornflower blue color is now turned earthworm gray. Bob kneels near the creature, close enough to stroke her shoulder, but far enough away to be just beyond the reach of her snapping, gnashing, rasping jaws.
"Lily, meet Penny,"
Bob says, with a tenderness that's almost jarring, as he reaches into the gunny sack and pulls out a morsel of purplish red tissue. The girl thing gnaws at the air and moans an excruciating moan. Bob feeds her the organ. Her milky white eyes fill with agitation, and something that almost looks like agony as she masticates the offal, fluids leaking through her tiny, puckered, toothless gums and running down her chin. Lily comes closer, the sorrow weighing down on her, forcing her to fall to her knees a few feet away from the child thing.
Oh my God. Bob, Jesus Christ, Oh, Jesus.
Bob gently strokes the child's waxy hair as the thing devours the entrails.
Penny, meet Lily,
Bob says very softly to the creature. Lily bows her head and stares at the floor.
Bob, this is Jesus. I promised him, Lily. Bob.
Lily shakes her head and continues staring at the floor as the watery smacking noises fill the air. She can't bear to look at the tiny monster. In her peripheral vision, Lily can see nail marks on the worn carpet, an outline of bloodstains where a panel was hastily driven into the floor. She can also see smudges of stubborn bloodstains on the walls that refuse to come out with comet and elbow grease. The air smells of sour, rotten copper. Bob says something else, but Lily doesn't hear it. Her mind swims with sadness now, marinating in the misery and madness baked into the fabric of this place, festering in the drapes and the grain of the floorboards and the black mold in the seams of the baseboards. It takes her breath away and burns her eyes. The tears come then, and Lily tries to get breath back in her lungs and stanch the welling of her eyes and the urge to sob. She stuffs it back down her gorge. She clenches her fists and looks back up at the girl. A long time ago, Penny Blake sat on her father's lap and listened to bedtime stories and sucked her thumb and nuzzled a security blanket. Now she gazes out through eyes the color of a fish belly, insensate as a mole, catatonic with a black hunger that will never fade. She is the living embodiment of the plague's toll. For an unbearable eternity, Lily Call slumps on her knees in front of the girl thing, shaking her head, staring at the floor while Bob feeds the rest of the chum to the creature, saying nothing, softly whistling as though merely braiding a little girl's hair. Lily gropes for the right words. She knows what has to be done. At last, after endless minutes, Lily finally manages to look up at Bob.
You know what we have to do, right?
She holds Bob's droopy, red-rimmed, crestfallen gaze.
You know there's no other way to go.
Bob lets out a miserable sigh, levers himself to his feet, shuffles over to the sofa and plops down as though the stone of Sisyphus rests on his shoulders. He slumps and wipes his eyes, his lips trembling as he says,
I know.
He looks at Lily through his tears.
You're gonna have to do it, Lily girl. I ain't got the heart for it.
They find an ice pick in the kitchen drawer and a relatively clean sheet on the bed, and Lily tells Bob to wait outside. But Bob Stuckey, a man who has ministered to dying soldiers and taken in stray dogs all his life, refuses to dishonor the memory of a little girl. He tells Lily that he will assist her. They sneak up behind the girl thing while she's feeding, and Lily throws the sheet over her, covering her head and face, trying not to disturb the creature any more than necessary. The tiny monster writhes and struggles in the cocoon of fabric for a moment, as Lily gently forces the wriggling body to the floor. Pressing her weight down on the shuddering form, Lily grips the ice pick in her right hand. The head squirms and flails under the sheet, and Lily struggles for a moment to position it properly for a clean and decisive thrust. Bob crouches next to her, next to the shivering lump, and begins softly singing to it, an old Christian hymn, and Lily pauses for a moment, just before plunging the ice pick into the head under the sheet, taken aback by the sound of Bob's voice.
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross,
Bob crooned softly to the thing that was once a child. His gravelly drawl suddenly transformed, turning soft and warm and as sweet as honey.
It's the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. Lily freezes, feeling something extraordinary develop inside the damp sheet beneath her. The writhing and shuddering and growling subside, the creature suddenly and inexplicably growing calm, as though listening to the sound of Bob's voice. Lily stares at the sheet. It doesn't seem possible, but the thing remains still. Bob softly sings, "Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll share." Lily thrusts the point deep into the cranium under the sheet, and the thing named Penny goes to her home far away. They decide to have a burial ceremony for the child. Lily comes up with the idea, and Bob thinks it's a pretty good thing to do. So Lily sends Bob out to gather the others, find a wheelbarrow, some tarp, a suitable container, and a proper location for the gravesite. After Bob leaves, Lily lingers in the apartment, one piece of unfinished business left to address. Chapter 23. Lily finds a box of shells in Philip's bedroom closet, which fit the 12-gauge pigeon gun leaning against the wall behind a stack of peach crates. She loads the gun and carries it into the side room. All it took was a single glance through the doorway into that shadowy chamber, where the ghastly aquariums are still lined along the wall, bubbling and thumping in the darkness, for the mystery of Philip Blake to forever be burned into Lily's memory. Now Lily positions herself in front of the glass containers and pumps the shotgun. She levels the barrel on the first aquarium and fires. The blast nearly blows her eardrums out as the container explodes, sending glass shards through the air and a gush of fluid across the floor. The bloated head tumbles out. She pumps another shell into the chamber and fires, and she does it again and again, hitting each aquarium dead center, spewing waves of water across the floor at her feet and sending the heads to oblivion. She goes through 25 shells until the room swims with cleansing water, broken glass, and the remains of the governor's trophies. She tosses the shotgun to the floor and wades out of the flooded room, her ears ringing, and the last traces of Philip Blake's madness exorcised from the earth. That evening, as the sun begins its descent behind the high treetops on the western horizon, and the air turns cool and luminous in the lengthening shadows, the 28 surviving inhabitants of Woodbury, Georgia, stand in a semicircle around a freshly turned mound of earth, finishing up their tribute to a lost child and closing a violent chapter in the town's post-plague history. The spot Bob picked out for Penny's final resting place is outside the wall, shaded by massive live oaks, dappled in wildflowers, and relatively free of the detritus of past skirmishes and attacks. Everybody stands in respectful silence, heads bowed, mouthing their final whispered prayers. Even the children present stop fidgeting for a moment and look down into the dirt and clasp their little hands together in prayer. Lily closes the small dog-eared Bible that Bob loaned her for the occasion, and she gazes at the ground for a beat, waiting for the moment to run its course. She has just finished reciting a brief eulogy for a child no one knew, a child who seems a fitting symbol for the loss of many others, as well as the sanctity of those lives still being lived. And now Lily feels a profound sort of closure. "Rest in peace, little Penny," she says at last, breaking the spell and bringing the moment to an end. "Thanks, everybody. Probably ought to be getting back now, before darkness rolls in." Bob stands next to Lily with a wadded handkerchief in his huge hands, the cloth soaked with his tears. Lily can tell by the sanguine look behind his rheumy, hound-dog eyes that this little impromptu ceremony has been good for him. It's been good for all of them.
One by one they turn away from the grave and start making their way across the vacant lot outside the northeast corner of town. Lily walks in the lead, Bob ambling along next to her, wiping his eyes with his handkerchief. Behind Bob, Matthew and Speed carry rifles on their hips in case they encounter any stray walkers. The others follow closely, chatting softly, talking idly about matters great and small, when the faint sound of an engine in the distance gets everybody's attention. Most of them stop and crane their necks to see what in God's name might be coming this way.
"If I didn't know better,"
Bob says to Lily, reaching for the Smith & Wesson lodged behind his belt,
"I'd say that was a car coming down 109.
"Okay, just take it easy. Everybody take it easy," Lily says to the group, glancing over her shoulder at the column of people behind her, and seeing some of them pulling weapons, some of the kids pushing in closer to the adults. "Let's just see what it is before we all get bent out of shape." For a moment, other than the sputtering sound of a dying engine, all Lily can make out in the distance is a wisp of black exhaust rising above the tree line and then diffusing in the wind. She keeps her eyes on the bend in the road a couple 100 yards away, when a battered station wagon comes into view. Lily can tell instantly that the car poses no threat. It appears to be an old, battered, rust-flecked Ford LTD, a late 1990s model, burning oil, with half of the wood panels shaved off in side-swipe mishaps, the wheels wobbling as though they might fall off at any moment. "Lower your weapons," Lily says to Matthew and Speed. "Come on, it's okay." As the vehicle rattles closer and closer, the people inside come into view. A tattered couple in the front, 3 small urchins in the back, apparently a family, their engine running on fumes. They pull up to within a safe distance, about 25 yards down the road, and cobble to a stop in a cloud of noxious haze. Lily raises her empty hands to show the people in the car she's not a threat. The driver's side door squeaks open, and the father climbs out. Dressed in layers of Salvation Army rags, as malnourished as a prisoner of war, the man is skin and bones. He looks as though he might collapse at any moment. He responds to Lily's gesture by raising his own hands to show that he too means no harm. "Evening," Lily calls out to the man.
"Hello."
The man's voice sounds hollow, like that of a terminal cancer patient.
"Mind if I ask if y'all got any spare drinking water you might part with?"
Lily recognizes the faint urbanized drawl of a southern city. Birmingham, Oxford, Jacksonville, maybe. And she glances over her shoulder at the others. "You folks stay put for a second. I'll be right back." She turns again to the stranger.
"I'm going to stroll a little closer, sir, if that's all right."
The man turns and looks worriedly at his family huddling nervously in the car. He turns back to Lily.
"Sure. I guess so. Come on over."
Lily walks calmly toward the station wagon, her hands still raised. The closer she gets, the more she can see how badly these people are hurting. The man and his wife look like they have one foot in the grave, their sallow ashen faces so thin they look cadaverous. In the cluttered back seat, the children are caked with grit and scantily dressed. The wagon is filled with empty wrappers and moth-eaten blankets. It's a miracle these people are still upright. Lily approaches and stands a few feet away from the father. "My name's Lily. And yours is?"
"Calvin. And that's Meredith."
He points at his wife and then at the kids.
"And that's Tommy, Bethany, and Lucas."
He looks at Lily.
"Ma'am, I would be forever grateful if you could maybe part with some food, and maybe any weapons you might be able to spare."
Lily looks at the man and proffers a warm, guileless, genuine smile. "I've got a better idea, Calvin. How about I show you around?"